Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at some seriously fascinating research today that tackles a massive, and I mean massive, financial leak in corporate learning. But more importantly, we're going to look at exactly how to solve it using the TPA performance framework. So if you are an executive or a senior leader, this analysis is custom built for you. We're going to break down how you can actually apply this proprietary model to turn your learning and development investments into measurable, real-world business transformation. Right off the bat, this presents what is arguably the ultimate C-suite dilemma. You have brilliant people, you make heavy capital investments in their development, but you still see completely stagnant execution in the field. Why do our best credentialed leaders still struggle to actually execute strategy and inspire change? Well, that is the exact question we are answering today. So, here is our roadmap for today. We're covering the corporate execution gap, high-stakes insurance compliance, the three pillars of the TPA model, that's training, practice, and application, and we'll wrap it all up with a concrete executive action plan. Let's jump into Section 1, the corporate execution gap. Before we even touch on the regulatory side of things, let's just look at the sheer scale of the problem. According to McKinsey data featured in our source material, organizations globally are dropping a staggering $370 billion a year into corporate training programs. That's an astronomical amount of money. But the return on that massive investment, it's fundamentally broken. Because here is the absolute kicker, backed by Harvard Business Review data. Despite that $370 billion spend, only 10% of training actually results in a measurable shift in behavior. Literally, just 10%. If your training doesn't move the performance needle, you are just bleeding budget. There's this fantastic quote from Dr. Austin Okomu in the text that really hits the nail on the head. Talent is common, execution is rare. Having smart people is absolutely never enough if your organizational culture can't convert that potential into reliable, day-to-day performance. If you can't point to exactly what changed after a training session, you're just investing in activity, not actual outcomes. Moving on to Section 2, high-stakes insurance compliance. We're going to apply this whole problem to an industry where execution failures don't just cost you money. They invite severe regulatory risk. We'll use the Texas life and health insurance sector as our prime example. In this world, a producer isn't just your standard salesperson. They hold a strict fiduciary duty. They operate within these incredibly complex upstream and downstream hierarchies that demand absolute precision. When an agent is acting on behalf of both an insurer and a client, poor execution isn't just a missed quota, it is a literal breach of trust. Just imagine the cognitive load placed on these producers. They have to seamlessly differentiate between super intricate structures on the fly. For instance, they need to know that a staff model HMO is a closed panel where care is provided by employed physicians, but an independent practice association, or IPA, is an open panel network of part-time providers working out of their own facilities. They have to know this stuff cold. Which perfectly transitions us into Section 3, the T in our framework, training knowledge architecture. This is the first core pillar of the solution. The fundamental point here is that training has to be a very deliberate knowledge architecture. When you look at this first phase, it requires highly structured learning design and precise competency mapping. Without the strategic architecture for actually acquiring domain knowledge and technical skills, you are basically building your organization on sand. Take something as inherently complex as health insurance premiums. A producer has to learn how to juggle expected disability rates, which is morbidity, then subtract invested interest, and finally add in operating expenses, also known as the loading charge. That entire complex formula has to be systematically taught and understood long before that agent ever picks up the phone to speak to a client. All right, Section 4, P for practice, execution, discipline. Because just knowing the formula or memorizing the definitions simply isn't enough. One more time. Honestly, this simple phrase needs to become the absolute mantra of your leadership team. This phase is all about deliberate rehearsals, simulation, and real performance coaching. You have to systematically repeat those learned behaviors until they literally become organizational muscle memory. Because if you run a big training event and you don't build those deliberate practice structures on the back end, well, you hit what Dr. Okumo calls Gap 1. This is the massive L&D investment drain. According to the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, without reinforcement loops, 70% of workshop knowledge decays within a single week. Seriously, think about that for a second. 70% of your budget just evaporating in 7 days. It's wild. To avoid catastrophic misrepresentation out in the field, teams have to repeatedly practice distinguishing deeply nuanced products. Think about the subtle but massive legal differences between METs, multiple employer trusts that might use a third-party administrator and buy stop-loss insurance, versus MUWAs, which are tax-exempt entities for 2 or more employers. You can't just read a bullet point about that once. You have to physically practice explaining it. That brings us to Section 5, A for Application Value Realization. This is the final pillar of the framework, where we see the strategic deployment of skills in real, live business contexts. Application means real-world accountability, because if your agents apply their knowledge poorly and, say, violate the Unfair Trade Practices Act, the Texas Department of Insurance is going to take action. The commissioner, after just a 30-day notice for a hearing, has the immense power to issue cease and desist orders, force client restitution, or levy heavy administrative penalties. So yeah, the stakes for proper application literally could not be higher. And this perfectly captures Gap 3 in the framework, application without character. You could have a technically brilliant leader who knows all the laws inside and out, but if they lack integrity and servant leadership, they are going to destroy your culture from the inside out. Like Peter Drucker famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Organizations that are built purely on competence without character always collapse under pressure.
Finally, Section 6, the Executive Action Plan.
So as an executive, how do you take all this and systematically close that execution gap starting tomorrow morning? The source material lays out an incredibly pragmatic blueprint for this. It details 8 strategic interventions designed to fundamentally shift how you view talent development entirely. And listen, these aren't just little HR tasks. These are CEO and senior leader mandates. Let's look at the critical ones. First up, you've got to audit your ROI immediately. Start measuring actual behavior change, not just who showed up to a seminar. Second, you need to treat every single training initiative as a highly managed project with strict KPIs and accountability gates. Third, mandate structured coaching for all of your people managers, because unused talent is buried talent. And fourth, build safe practice fields like simulations and stretch assignments, way before you ever expose your producers to live, high-stakes regulatory environments. The text also notes that for organizations wanting to really accelerate this transformation, external partners like McKinney Global Consulting utilize this exact TPA framework to conduct diagnostic audits and build bespoke programs. It's essentially an option to pinpoint your specific revenue leaks and implement these transformation programs with fully structured outcomes. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. When you sit down and sign off on your very next corporate training budget, ask yourself, are you just paying for the illusion of progress, or are you finally ready to architect real, measurable performance? The choice is totally yours.